There were some chaotic moments during Hillary Clinton's testimony regarding Jeffrey Epstein before the House Oversight Committee yesterday. The testimony was halted after conservative influencer Benny Johnson posted a photo of Hillary giving testimony that he claimed was taken by Lauren Boebert. She's a congresswoman, which is not allowed, by the way.
No.
Okay? Hillary took aim at the House Republicans in a statement that read the following. She said, this institutional failure is designed to protect one political party and one public official, and we know who he is, rather than to seek truth and justice for the victims and survivors. So here's what the committee chair, James Comer, said before the hearing yesterday. Watch.
No one's accusing at this moment the Clintons of any wrongdoing. They're going to have due process. But we have a lot of questions, and the purpose of the whole investigation is to try to understand many things about Epstein. The Democrats voted to subpoena the Clintons. The Democrats voted with the Republicans to hold the Clintons in contempt. So the Democrats have just as many questions for the Clintons as the Republicans. So this isn't a partisan witch hunt. This was a motion, a bipartisan motion supported by the Democrats to bring the Clintons in.
Yeah, they want to tell the truth, I guess, and they want to clear the table. If you're innocent, you say, put me on the stand.
She also said, I want the American public to see it. I want it to be televised. So the fact that Lauren Boebert sent out that picture, you know, is really unfortunate for a couple of reasons. One, because it's really in a closed-door congressional hearing. It's just not allowed. And of course, because it just gives you a snapshot that that can be manipulated rather than having the American public see it. But I will tell you, you know, fine, Hillary Clinton, she's going to testify. Great.
Bill Clinton.
When Bill Clinton's going to testify, when will Trump answer questions about Epstein under oath? That is my question.
That is
when will
question.
he answer?
So let me finish this. So Bill Clinton is testifying today. So if Republicans want any credibility here, don't they have to call in Trump to testify? I ask you, Sarah.
Well, look, I mean, first of all, AG Merrick Garland could have done something about this. He did not. This did not.
Shame on him.
This did not happen under President Biden.
Okay.
So I think that we should also talk about Bill Clinton, because I don't think this is just purely political. I think there's every reason that he should be brought in. You know,
there are
photos of him in a hot tub.
And there are also photos of
Melania
Trump with Epstein. So perhaps the First Lady should also come and testify.
Well, I think they should bring everyone in. As someone who literally does not care who this uncovers.
Correct.
Because it is not political.
None of us do.
Doesn't have a party name.
Bring them all in.
This is about victims.
Right.
They need to bring Merrick Garland in. I agree with that part. They need to, I think the point that's being made in your introduction about this being about one party is not to say that they shouldn't be held accountable, but it's almost like, so we've been here, where are all of you guys? Because there are things that are right now being released, but they're redacting the people that the powerful people, and they're releasing the victims' names sometimes,
right.
and then saying whoops. You know, like, these are mistakes that should be forgiven, and everyone should have to stand in front of this committee and talk. And I want to see it all. I don't care who you are.
I want to see Elon Musk, because
I was very disappointed that Lauren Boebert released that picture, because Lauren Boebert, this congresswoman, has been one of the heroes in this. Remember, she is the congresswoman that Trump put into the Situation Room to pressure her not to vote for the release of the Epstein files.
Marjorie
Right
Taylor
now,
Greene
this
also.
week, Lauren Boebert is one of the few Republicans, among other Republican women, standing up and speaking out against her colleague, Tony Gonzalez, and demanding that he resign for an affair he was allegedly having with a staffer who then died by suicide. So this is not the Lauren Boebert who has led us to this. And I think, look, I think what we are seeing here is the unvarnished hypocrisy of the Republican Party. They should be as pissed that Donald Trump didn't even acknowledge the Epstein survivors that were sitting at the State of the Union. They should be equally angry that Pam Bondi didn't turn around and acknowledge the Epstein survivors that were at her congressional hearing. And they should have shown up the same way they showed up today, en masse, all of them. In New York, they should have shown up when Les Wexner was deposed, when only Democrats showed up.
They're protecting their own.
But
That's
the number
point.
one issue burdening Donald Trump are the Epstein files. He's down 38% on this. So I'm not shocked, nor did I expect a better version of the president to show up at the State of the Union and address the victims. So I don't even, that part I don't care. But Hillary Clinton, in her opening remarks on this, her testimony, gave a play-by-play about what someone should do if they genuinely cared about this. And some of the things that I say, a committee endeavoring to stopping human trafficking would fix a system that allowed Epstein to get away with his crimes in 2008.
Yeah.
They also wouldn't have gutted it with all the cutbacks. They had this whole thing.
The Trump administration
Yes.
gutted the
You know what's going
trafficking
to fix
unit.
this?
at
When
Department of
powerful men stop protecting powerful men.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's not going to
Do
happen.
whatever the hell they want with women.
Well, what's interesting is a lot of these men that were subpoenaed were allowed to provide one-page or two-page affidavits to explain their ties or not to Epstein by affidavit.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton did the same thing, provided the affidavits, but no, this committee demanded that they appear. This committee needs to demand Elon Musk should appear. Bill Gates should appear. The First Lady, Melania Trump, should appear. Donald Trump should appear. Everyone mentioned in the Epstein files that could possibly have knowledge should appear if
I
this
agree.
committee is truly
agree.
interested in finding out what
Yes.
happened to
I
those
agree.
survivors.
I think it should be equal opportunity.
Yes.
If the name of the game
Right.
is transparency,
Yes.
then
And Sarah is right.
justice.
And Merrick Garland should appear because
he should
you know,
appear.
Republicans keep saying, don't you think that if there was something there that would be incriminating about Trump, Merrick Garland would have released
Yeah.
it? No, because he
Yeah.
was worried about his own reputation and not looking political. And he needs to answer why he is amongst the 4 administrations that have failed
Yeah. Yep.
these survivors and keep failing these
I agree
survivors.
with that.
Sonny, you have something
Oh,
to
I
say.
have a read. The Clintons have not been accused of any wrongdoing and have denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes.
And yet
Trump
there
has
they are.
also denied all allegations, and both Trump and Melania have denied any wrongdoing in connection to Epstein.
And this is also not the first scandal for the Clintons. They always manage to overcome.
This is not a scandal for Hillary. It's a scandal that she's being dragged in.
Yeah.